2. Stranger from the night. At the unexpected sight of her young mistress unconscious in the arms of a tall, immaculately dressed black man, Janet Kendall seemed frozen into immobility. She recovered quickly and walked unsteadily towards the bed. "Put Miss Linda down. Whatever's been going on here tonight? I'm sure it isn't good." Janet began to soothe the white-faced girl who was now lying back on the pillows. The angry figure of Sid Kendall appeared in the doorway to face the intruder. "Who are you?" Sid's voice held as much menace as he could put into it. Zak Biko smiled his famous smile and producing his warrant card he offered it to Kendall. "Police, is it?" "Not exactly. I am a senior officer attached to the International Department of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, New York City. My boss is Colonel Jack Jones." Without giving the dazed servant time to reply, Zak went on, "I'd just like another look around. Then I'll phone Colonel Jones and call the local murder squad." "In that order." At the word murder, the houseman shook off his inertia. "Murder?" Sid Kendall glanced quickly at the bed where his wife was rubbing Linda's limp hands. "What murder? Whose murder?" Sid glared at the calm detective. Zak took Sid by the arm and pulled him out of the bedroom. Out in the hall he said, "You'd better listen and listen carefully, Kendall." Sid nodded. "I'm listening." It did not take long for Zak to explain how he came to be in the Harvey home at all, but he doubted Sid's ability to understand. He took the man's arm and almost dragged him into the upstairs lounge where Franklin Harvey still sat staring sightlessly into the middle distance. It was a while before Kendall could speak. Some bastard, shot the guy." Sid's voice was low, and his words came out jerkily. Zak grinned. "As you say, friend. Some bastard shot Franklin Harvey. At around midnight your young mistress, Miss Linda in there, came home sneakily. She came in here using a torch not wanting to wake Franklin Harvey and have him know she was around. But, as you see, Franklin Harvey had lost all interest. Linda screamed and I heard her. That's the lot except for the study downstairs." Sid tore his eyes away from the dead man in the armchair. "What's wrong with the study then? Whoever shot Harvey tore his study to bits. I want to make a further examination before I call the police. Are you any good with coffee?" Sid nodded. "Maybe that's a good idea." He went towards the hall. "I'll get the percolator going." He had got as far as the door when Biko said suddenly, "Who's Jonah? Miss Linda lost her senses when I asked her. Maybe you can tell me." Sid Kendall stood still. He made no effort to face his questioner. "Jonah? That's what I said, Kendall, and I want an answer." Zak wasn't playing games anymore and it sounded in his voice. "I don't know no Jonah, Mr. Biko." Sid still didn't look at his companion. Instead, he set off quickly for the kitchen. "I'll be getting that coffee. I guess we could all use some." Zak let him go. He was now convinced that whoever Jonah was, he would soon have some explaining to do. He approached the body of Franklin Harvey. Carefully, so as not to disturb anything, he frisked through the pockets. In the breast pocket of the expensive suit his questing fingers touched a piece of paper. Zak drew it out. It was a typed note. "I'd hate to spoil your public image, Frank. This is to point out that everyone is entitled to his pay. That means I need a raise. Need I say more?" The note was unsigned. It joined the other note in the detective's pocket. Then Zak went out, closing the lounge door softly, leaving the lights on in the room. He ran downstairs to the study, making no sound. From the distant kitchen, he could hear Sid Kendall banging about with saucepans, presumably the milk was to be heated. To say that Zak Biko hated an unsolved mystery would be an understatement. There was something that smelled bad about this one. This was murder with malice. The question was why. What had Franklin Harvey done to society to get himself murdered? These were questions to which the detective had to find answers. He knew it wasn't officially any of his business, but ever since those early days in Johannesburg he had learnt not to trust things to the local constabulary alone. Besides that, Soweto life had given him an intuition for evil, and something in this rich man's house smelled very evil. He began to search the torn-apart study systematically. It wasn't long before the high bookshelves claimed his attention. The books were a mixed lot, with several first editions bound in hand-tooled leather. A quick inspection soon showed that, whoever had bought these books, Franklin Harvey had never opened a single one of them. One by one they began to join the drawers and papers strewn on the study carpet. It was some time before Zak struck oil. Behind a set of histories of Africa in mint condition, Zak's sharp eyes noticed a small round indentation in the wood paneling. Carefully, and without hurry, he removed the books from the entire shelf. Then he pressed the spot gently. He was rewarded immediately as a square door opened silently to reveal the wall safe. It took 10 minutes for Zak Biko's sensitive fingers to find the combination before the safe gave up its secrets. A knock on the door startled him. He had been concentrating so deeply that the world around him had almost ceased to exist. Sid's voice intruded on his thoughts. "Coffee's up, Mr. Biko, and Janet says Miss Linda wants to talk to you." "Okay, I'm coming. You go on up." Zak's eyes returned to the packs of new, high-denomination banknotes stacked to one side of the safe. The safe wasn't very wide, but its depth was surprising. Slowly, Zak pulled the packs of notes out and placed them tidily on the carpet by his feet. When the space was almost clear he saw a tin. It was 6 inches square at the most. He reached in for it carefully so as not to smudge any fingerprints that might help the police when they took over. He carried his find to the desk and sat down in the leather swivel chair, pulling a small silver penknife from his pocket. As the lid gave into the knife, a small amount of pure white powder dropped onto the blotting pad. Whistling quietly, Zak Biko wetted a finger and dipped it in the powder. "Dope," he muttered, grimacing. The word sounded dirty, like something Biko would prefer not to say. Thoughtfully, he replaced the lid. His department had for some time been trying to trace an international gang of drug smugglers. Their leader had to be a man in public life, a leader of men, someone as ruthless as a starving tiger finding a lovely woman walking in his path. He lifted the telephone. Minutes later he was listening to Colonel Jack Jones speaking from his comfortable apartment in Washington. The colonel was sleepy and far from delighted to be wakened at 2 a.m. to be told that his ace detective was busy guarding the dead body of the wealthy Franklin Harvey. "So, some guy's done for Franklin Harvey? Call the cops and let me get back to sleep, there's a good man." "Hold it, Jack." The two men were good friends in private even if they did not always agree on official matters. Zak Biko had a mind and a will of his own, with little fear or use for officialdom. "There's a secret wall safe in Harvey's study containing more than $200,000 all straight out of the mint, and that's not all." "Make it quick then." Colonel Jones wasn't all that interested. "What would you say to pure heroin? 1 tin full." Zak grinned to himself as the colonel's attitude changed. "You're sure, Zak?" he barked. "Sure, as it's raining like hell outside, sir." "It may be a coincidence, but I don't believe so. Nobody rubs out men like Franklin Harvey without good reason. This could be the break we've been looking for. HM. One day I'll get around to making you tell me how you got to be a human bloodhound, Biko. Meanwhile, carry on there. I'll make a few phone calls and hold off the ordinary cops, like them to come out to guard the place. Later maybe. I'll ring you back." Without waiting for an answer, but not missing the angry snort from Jack Jones, Zak replaced the receiver. One more quick call alerted the murder squad. He asked for discreet surveillance of the house and gardens. Then, swiftly, he returned the money and tin to the concealed safe, replacing enough books to hide the opening from prying eyes. When he was satisfied, he recalled Sid's invitation to take coffee with the girl. Making sure that the windows were bolted fast, he switched off the lights and, leaving the study door open, he again ran up the stairs, taking two at a time. The girl had undressed, or had been undressed by the hovering Janet Kendall, and the silk gown she now wore revealed more of her than was strictly necessary to assure Zak Biko that this girl was a beauty all over. Her breasts, slim waist and shapely legs were still visible under the clinging material. Linda Harvey pushed Janet Kendall aside with a show of temper. "Why are you still here, Mr. Biko?" she snapped. "You said you would call the police." Linda Harvey had certainly made a quick recovery. Zak bowed politely. "I've just made a call to Washington, to my departmental chief. For the moment I am in charge of this case." "What case? You don't even look like a policeman, more like a diplomat or something. What has my uncle's murder to do with you?" Linda started to get up. "When we get to know each other better I might tell you, Linda. Meanwhile, I'd like some of that coffee Sid made just now. Aren't you getting too familiar?" Janet Kendall was fussing like a broody hen. "Miss Harvey has had a bad shock. She doesn't need you to bully her about." "It's all right, Janet." Linda was having second thoughts. "Offer Mr. Biko some coffee, and maybe brandy. That sounds like a good idea all round." Zak looked about him for a chair. "As soon as we're all cozy perhaps, you'll tell me why my question about Jonah caused you to faint." He sat down with a movement as elegant as if he'd been visiting the president. "I don't know any Jonah," Linda sounded sullen. She accepted the comfortable armchair drawn up by Janet. "And even if I did, I wouldn't discuss him with you." Her face hardened, aging her 5 years. She couldn't be more than 20, but would need firm handling, Zak decided. Sid came in with a silver tray. The cups and saucers were of thin, gold-edged china and the pots for the milk and coffee were solid silver. He offered his wares like an old-fashioned butler making his bow on stage. "No need to go upsetting Miss Linda again, sir." Sid spoke softly. "She's all alone in the world now, so you go easy. I'm going to be a lot easier than the local boys would be." Zak was firm. "Just tell me the truth and nothing but the truth." His face was harder than diamonds. "But if you lie to me, any one of you, God help you." His warning was delivered like a whiplash and for a moment no one spoke. "Tell me about Franklin Harvey," he continued. "Each one of you, starting with you, Sid. Remember I only met him when he'd already died." Sid Kendall tested one leg after the other whilst Zak sipped his coffee and then tried the mature brandy the man had already poured for him. The master wasn't easy to work for. Sid didn't seem to know where to start. "But he paid well and me and the missus was comfortable and well paid for anything we ever did for him," Janet chimed in belligerently. "Don't you go speaking ill of the dead, Sid Kendall. It's unlucky." "I ain't speaking ill, January. I'm trying to explain." Sid swallowed hard. "How long are you going to leave him in there? He's dead and the dead need to be on ice. You should know that." He spoke accusingly. "Very soon now the doctor will come with an ambulance." Zak was enjoying his brandy and coffee. The dead man next door seemed to be of secondary importance to him. "Then the body will be in the hands of the police pathologist. Franklin Harvey will cease to be the rich man all the world knows about and turn into a naked, disemboweled, hideously rotting corpse of no use to anyone." Zak looked up from his glass to find himself being glared at by the two women and the indignant man. "Need you be so crude?" The girl was on her feet again, looking beautiful in her fury. "My uncle never did you any harm. I wonder." Zak grinned disarmingly at her. "Has anyone ever told you how lovely you look when you let temper get you?" All the same, Linda allowed herself to be pushed down again among the cushions by Janet, who stood wordlessly patting the girl's slim shoulder. "Why be so damned crude? Murder is crude, Miss Harvey. You can't get any cruder, believe me." It's my business to know who killed your uncle and, more important, why. The girl nodded. It's important to me too, Mr. Biko. Why? He knew well that he had been a brute in his questioning, but he also knew it was the only way to shock the truth out of these folk. The girl stared back at him. Behind her chair, Janet's plump, motherly figure hovered menacingly. Sid remained statue-like beside Zak's chair. He still held the heavy silver tray in both hands. Did you love your uncle? Zak smiled kindly. Linda Harvey began to cry. She covered her face with well-kept hands that had never had to wash dishes. Zak Biko took up his brandy glass, well satisfied with the way things were developing. Suddenly she removed her hands from her tear-stained face and looked at him. No. I didn't love him. Nobody could. He couldn't return it, do you see? Franklin Harvey couldn't love any person more than he loved himself. It wasn't in him. Surprisingly, it was Sid who had the next word. Miss Linda's right, sir. The governor wasn't backward in being pleasant to them as was useful. But in private, I guess he didn't go much on nobody but himself. That's right, Janet, he appealed to his wife. Mr. Franklin was a loner, Janet confirmed grudgingly. In all the years I've never known him overflowing with sympathy for other folks' troubles. Sid's right there, Mr. Biko. Uncle Franklin thought he owned everything he paid for. Including me. He hated it when I went out with friends. He was terrified I'd fall in love with some guy who would want to marry me. Linda sounded less tearful. Zak replaced the brandy glass on the table beside him. Okay. Now for the million-dollar question once again. He looked from one to the other. This time I want the truth. Understand? No one answered him. Who is Jonah? Or who was he? After a long silence, which Zak did nothing to break, it was again Sid Kendall who spoke. Mr. Jonah's been dead these 19 years. There ain't no other Jonah. Not that we knows of. Why do you ask? Janet's round, red face had a purple tinge. The girl said nothing, only looked from one to the other. Okay, so Jonah's also dead. So, who was he when he was with us? Zak fired the questions around like an overworked machine gun. He was younger brother to Mr. Franklin. That's what, if you must know. He got married to a Hannah Aubrey, that was years after the old Harveys had got dead and buried. The two boys was left, see. Franklin being the elder was the heir. That was years ago. Sid's voice dried up and Zak began digging deeper. So, Jonah Harvey fell in love and got married. What then? Mr. Franklin never forgave him, that's what. Then Mr. Jonah was in Paris, that's in France, with Miss Hannah when Miss Linda here was born. There was a train crash and Mr. Jonah and his wife got killed. The baby was at home with a nurse. It was me who flew over to fetch her to this house. Janet glared at the detective as if willing to murder him for being so nosy. Sid took up the story. Mr. Franklin took the baby and gave her everything she could ever want, but he never talked no more about Mr. Jonah and he wouldn't never let Miss Linda have boyfriends like's normal. Linda broke in, almost whimpering. He owned me, do you understand? Uncle Franklin used me like he'd use a